Welcome to the Roundabout. Each week we gather together at a round table to discuss a specific topic of God's Word, and we are so glad that you've come to join us today. We pray that this will be a blessing to you as it is to us as we study God's Word together.
Did you know you were going to be in a phone Bible? Did you know you were going to be phones?
All right, we will start in verse 25. We're going to go to 32. So again, everybody read 2 verses each. Go ahead, Noel. Why don't you read Luke 15, 5 and 26. 25 and 26.
Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing, so he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant.
And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and because he has received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf." But he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him.
But he replied, "All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money upon prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fatted calf."
His father said to him, "Look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, and now he is found."
All right. Now, as we look at the elder brother, we got to again understand who it was who started asking Jesus the question, "Why are you hanging out with sinners?" And when we look at the older brother, I know the first time I saw the older brother, I looked at him as the good guy. The younger brother is the bad guy. This is the good son because he stayed. But the more I understood the parable, and it wasn't until even in my college years that I understood that no, Jesus was making a point here. And in order to even illustrate the point, because the point is not that the older son did anything wrong. If we're going to come up with a list of things that the older son did wrong, that list wouldn't exist, because the older son was actually the good son. He always stayed home. But again, the father was saying, "Man, you're not even with me here." And so I entitled this, "How God Reacts to People Who Don't Like Him," because it seems to me that even though the son stayed, he didn't like his dad very much. There's other motivations for him to stay. Now, there's this parable that somebody had. Obviously, it's a parable. It's not biblical. But in that parable, Jesus talked to his disciples, or Jesus was going from one place to another. And he tells his disciples, "Okay, guys, I want you to pick a rock and I want you to carry it for me." And the disciples kind of look at each other like, "Any rock?" He says, "Yeah, any rock." And because he didn't specify, the size of the rock, he didn't specify how heavy it should be, everybody picked their own rock. And Peter, looking around, says, "This guy didn't even specify what rock." He picked the smallest rock he could possibly find. And so they traveled for a couple of hours, and then Jesus asked them to sit down and he said, "All right, take your rock out." And then he makes the rock, the stones into bread, and says, "Okay, guys, it's lunchtime. This is your lunch." And so, the little rock that Peter brought, you looked at it, it's basically nothing more like a communion wafer. In seconds, it was gone. And so after everybody ate whatever rock they brought, Jesus then said, "All right, guys, I want you to carry a rock for me." And this time, Peter was like, "Okay, I know this trick before. I already know what this trick is all about." And he picks the biggest rock rock he could carry, and he hoisted it up to his shoulder. And this time for 2 hours, he could barely walk, but he's like, supper is going to be worth it this time around. And as they came near a river, Jesus says, all the rocks you have, I want you to throw it in the river. And at this point, Peter was livid. He's like, throw it in the river. And Jesus, after kind of reading what his mind says, he says, Peter, didn't I ask you to carry a rock for me? I says, yes. And then he says, but who really were you carrying the rock for? The son stayed. The son did everything. The elder son did everything he was supposed to do. But it was his motivation that got the best of him. Because he didn't do it because he loved his father. In fact, there are similarities between the younger son and the older son. And the similarities is they were just trying to do what they thought was going to make them happy. In fact, I would dare say both of them wanted the father's property and did not want the father. And what the father was trying to do in this parable was trying to get his children to love him. This is the thing about love. You cannot force people to love you. If love is forced, it ceases to become love. And so here's the son coming from a hard day's work, a hard days of work, and he sees the party, and he cautiously gets in because obviously now he was in his property. This party was happening in his property. See, the one part of the parable that I didn't quite get before was if the father divided his inheritance in half, how much stuff did the father have? Some people will say, no, he actually divided in 1/3. I'm like, all right, he divided in 1/3. But still, whatever the father is in, the son has part ownership of that. Because in the son's mind, my brother is dead. He doesn't deserve anything, even a party. So he sees this happening in his house, in his property. And he's like, why didn't anybody notify me of this? And so he asks one of the servants, hey, what's going on? And the servant tells him they're celebrating because your brother came home. Now, it says here that when he heard that, he got angry. And I want us to think for a second, what would make him angry? What is it about his brother's appearance that would trigger emotions of anger? Not, oh, my lands, I'm glad he's okay. Could it possibly be that even the elder brother was saying, I really wish you were dead? And if that's the case, maybe, just maybe, the elder brother and maybe also the younger son at some time always wish their dad was dead. Why? Because the dad always got in the way of what they thought would bring them happiness. Now, this is where you need to understand the culture to understand how now the older brother was so mad at the dad that he would dare shame his father. Because the son then stayed outside. Now, everybody could see him outside. He wasn't trying to hide. In fact, I believe the son was trying to get people's attention. Now, if you've ever been in a wedding or in a party where there's tension, and there's tension because somebody outside wants to get somebody's attention who's inside and wants them to come out, then you know that the party probably started dying down. All of a sudden, people aren't laughing so hard anymore. The focus then gets focused on the older son, who's now pacing back and forth, and you can tell he's angry. And now what's interesting is the father now goes out. That also is a very weird move, a very strange move, because you're the patriarch. People are supposed to come to you, not you to them. So it seems to me that even the son is on the outside, that the son doesn't like the father. And maybe that is the very definition of sin that this is bringing out. It's not so much a list of wrong things to do. Now, this is the thing. If you can't stand God, or if you don't like God, there will be things that you will do that you can categorize as sin. But Jesus in this parable wasn't bringing out a list, because sin starts in a person's mind at a place nobody can read except God. And so as the brother comes out, as the father comes out, it says the brother was angry, that the father had to beg him. Again, all of these words are trigger words. Because I think as Jesus was now telling this part of the story, I can also hear his voice breaking. Just as he was happy to run towards the other son, there's a heaviness in his heart, because he's about to go get a lecture from his son. And the lecture is this: all these years I've slaved for you. And this is where you see the motivation come in. The son looked at his time with his dad as a slave factory. He looked at their home as a slave factory. His motivation was never because he loved dad. It was always because I'm working so I can get what you have. I'm only here because I want to look good to other people. I'm only here because I want to be the responsible one. I want to be the person who people will look at and say, this guy didn't embarrass the family. But see, there's a difference between the way you relate to someone you love and somebody that you're having a business acquaintance. This older son was treating his dad no more than a person would treat a car salesman, or a car salesman would treat a customer. Basically says, I want what you have. You have a car, I want a car. So please sell me the car at a price I want it. And if the price is either too high, then there's a little bit of haggling that goes on. Sometimes there's arguing, but basically there's no relationship. It's a transaction. And to the older son, everything he did at the farm was nothing more than a transaction. How does that relate to us?
I think,
Go ahead, Ted.
I think he was jealous that he was going to lose his place as number one son, and then what was left was going to be split again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because in Europe and wherever over there, and it's still like it today, the oldest son is the fat cat. He gets it all, and the other sons, they kick him out. In England, they went to Africa.
Right. And so obviously there's this whole thing of, I can't afford to lose anymore.
Right.
And it's not like he's needing anything, right? It's not like he's like, okay, I'm not going to eat tomorrow if I lose this. He just is too selfish. The issue with the oldest son is his pride. But how do you quantify pride? And I think it's really hard. And so basically, the father says in verse 31, something that, again, I didn't get before, but when he says, look, dear son, you always have stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. I thought that meant that everything the father had was the son's. I didn't know that it was the other way around, where it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm here because of you. You're the one, this house that I'm in, this is your land. This is your house. I'm just waiting to die, basically. But he says, I'm using whatever I have to celebrate this happy day. For your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but is now found. This is the thing, though, is the story ends there. I know, I wish there was, the brother said, oh, okay, or he stomped off. I don't know what he did. And the reason why I think it's open-ended was because Jesus was talking to the elder brothers, and the elder brothers were none other than the Pharisees. And he doesn't know how that story, well, he knows how that story is going to end, but he wants to leave that open-ended to realize that the Pharisees now have a choice to make. See, this is the other part that we're going to go through a little bit more on our next session. This is the only story where nobody went out after the younger son when he got lost. There's a reason for that. Jesus didn't miss out on that story because, again, he was talking to the people who's supposed to go out after the younger son. But the elder sons, or the elder son in this story, represents the people who are so busy trying to get more out from God that they no longer have any energy, they no longer have any motivation. They're too busy. And basically, their motivation is, God, I'm working so that you give me everything I want. And this is where there's this disappointment that comes when people work hard for God and all of a sudden their prayers don't get answered. And at that point, they're like, I'll forget you then, God. There's this story about Sarieli, who in the play Amadeus, Sarieli is this person who is praying to God that God would give him the talents of a great composer, so that when he gets this talent, he's going to glorify God. And then Mozart appears in his life. That's why the play is called Amadeus. And when Mozart appears, Mozart gets everything that Sarieli was looking for, except Mozart was a drunkard, he was a womanizer, he was somebody that everything that Sarieli wasn't. And Sarieli was so angry at God. How dare you? I have been a good person. I did everything right. I want things for your glory. I do everything for your glory. And you give the gift to someone who can care less about you. And again, I go back to the parable. Jesus saying, why did you carry that rock? I asked you to carry the rock for me, but were you really carrying it for me, or were you carrying it for yourself? See, the elder son wasn't working for his father. And he wanted to let everybody think he was. But when push came to shove, and the reason why his true character came out was when his father's greatest desire, which was to have his younger brother home, came about. He hated his father. He got so angry at his father. But again, if the story is about how the father reacts to people who can't stand it, the story says his father goes out and begs his son. because we seem to serve a father who just wants his children home. Who doesn't say, oh, you're stinky. No, clean yourself up first. Clean up your attitude first. Or you better not embarrass me. You just have a father who says, I want you more than anything to be home. For me, that is the greatest news of this parable. All right, now that we talked about the younger son and the older son, which of the two brothers do you relate to the most and why?
I used to relate to the older one. Like you, I think when I was younger, I always felt sorry for him. It's like, here's the guy that sticks around, does what's right, does everything he's supposed to do. And here the older father seems to appreciate more the younger one who rejected him and rebelled and stuff like that. So, and when I was younger, I used to identify myself with the older one.
Right. So, you know, we talked about transaction versus relationship. And that's the thing, for the son, everything was a transaction. And I realized that I was the elder brother because to me, everything about church was a transaction. I go to church and then I get out, you know. I pray because I have to, because it looks religious. You don't pray because you want to. You don't pray passionately. You don't talk to God about how wonderful he is, unless you're in front of people and you want to use big words, you know, because it's a transaction. It's just a way to show off. Whereas a relationship, if the relationship would have come out when the younger brother would come home. The relation would come out every single day if the older son went up to the dad and say, are you feeling bad? And then his dad would voice out his longing for the younger son to come home. And if there's a relationship there, then for him, he would be looking out with his father as well. And when the younger son would come home, then he would rejoice because he's had that relationship. Not a transaction, because for him, this wasn't on the receipt, you know, this isn't part of the transaction. The transaction is, I do everything you want me to do, and you need to do everything I want to do.
I think for me, it depends on the season of my life. I've definitely have been a younger brother at some point in time and say, you know, I'd rather have fun. And then I've also been on the other side where I'm like, not necessarily even for people that were lost, but people who were in the same house as me. Like, well, I think I am better. You know what I mean? So I think it just depends on where I am in my journey.
Right. Well, how are the two brothers alike, and how are they different? You know, I mentioned a couple of things, but in your estimation, how is the younger brother and the older brother alike? Are they the same?
Well, I think they're both alike in the sense, both of them wanted their father's property. Both of them wanted the riches that their father could give them. And both of them didn't really care for him. And you see it out in both stories.
Right.
I think they're different in the fact that the younger son came to the realization that he truly did love his father and wanted his father more than the riches and to be with his father.
Right.
And the older son, as you've said, we don't really know. I mean, the caring part of you and the part that cares wants to think that he turned around, but we don't know.
Right.
And the younger one asked for forgiveness. He said, Father, I sinned against you in heaven. But the older son, there's nothing indicated. I mean, he might have later, but not.
Right.
Right. And I think that's why Jesus told the Pharisees, the tax collectors and the prostitutes go to heaven before you. Because at least they ask forgiveness. They want to interact. Whereas the true older children are like, no, if you're going to accept them, then I don't want to accept you.
I think one of the differences between them is that the younger brother did come to understand he was not worthy. The older brother always thought he was worthy.
Mhm.
Because if you notice, he says, I have served you. I have always followed all your commands. It's almost like, yeah, that's all I needed to do, and I'm worthy.
Right.
Because I did this. Where the younger son was finally like, wait a minute, I don't deserve anything. I don't deserve any of this stuff. And so I think that was one of the big differences between them.
Right.
Also, a difference is that the younger son got to the rock bottom
Mhm.
and the older one didn't have to, never experienced that.
Right. And I wonder if elder sons ever get to rock bottom, or they just kind of float by in this, illusion, if I can even call it that. Oh, yeah, I'm good.
I think it's hard coming from rich and then eating from a pig's trough. You know what I mean? I mean, that's like a rough reality, whereas the older brother has always been with servants and, so he doesn't know.
Right, no experience.
One of the things for the older brother, I've always thought when the father says, but I've been with you and stuff, I was kind of under the impression and raised with the fact the father was trying to tell him, we're celebrating your brother being back. He had to go through these hard things, but you've been with me the whole time. Kind of like us as Christians, or when you believe in God, we have some of the blessings all along through our lives. And someone who hasn't lived for Jesus or hasn't been there hasn't necessarily had that peace, that understanding, that confidence that we know. So he's saying, let's give him a little extra. Let's give him some peace because he's lived so long without.
Right.
Well, and I think also the younger brother or the older brother played right into what the younger brother thought of himself. Because when he came back, he knew that he really didn't deserve to even be a part of the family. And the older brother says, the son of yours. He basically, I don't claim you as a brother anymore, the son of yours.
Right.
He detached himself and detached his brother from the family, just as his brother thought he deserved.
Right.
So there's a difference there between the father and the older son too.
Right.
But is that showing what we do sometimes?
Oh, absolutely.
And I think, we've all maybe not all, but I know, with Gladys, I actually think I've been both sons.
Mhm.
I totally relate to the younger son going, no, don't want any part of this. And then the older brother too is like, I'm in. Feel sorry for these guys, but I know I'm in. And that has wreaked havoc on my relationship with God.
I think, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, that's where they're alive. Like Cherry was saying, sometimes we in the church we realize, you're in the church, but you don't really have that peace of mind that, resting in God's promises and everything. And the younger son, when he was away from all of that. He was relying on his riches, he was relying on his charms, he was relying on something else himself, and so both brothers were kind of in that same position, because even though he was in the same house,
Right.
he wasn't really experiencing that peace with his dad.
And this is where Jesus defines sin, not as a list, but he defines sin as a state of life where God is not a part of it. And both of them were trying to find happiness without God. The younger son was trying to find happiness as far away from home. The older son was finding happiness on things, not the father. And what's interesting is that God knows that. and it must hurt him. I can't even imagine what it's like to be a parent who's rejected by your children.
Mm.
That can't be a good feeling. But what this parable seems to tell us is that does not deter him from wanting his children home. And that for me is incredible news. That is good news that we can tell anybody. He's like, hey, we're just waiting for you to come home. We're still looking. I know you don't like us very much, but hey, we love you anyway, type of a thing. And we can say that because our leader, our Father, says that. Now, do you think people try to control God through being obedient? And if yes or no, and if yes, how?
I think it's a mind game.
Hmm.
Well, if I'm really good, I'll get what I want. And when you don't get what you want, then you're mad. So you're spoiled. Okay? Maybe you can't have it both ways, I don't know.
Right.
So, but I can see people that way. I've known some. But as far as my brother and I don't know how to answer that question because we never had nothing. So if he would have left, I would have still had nothing. So it didn't matter. So it wasn't about money with us.
Right. Yeah, can you imagine a child being obedient? Let's just say because he wanted some tickets to a rock concert that there's going to be all kinds of drugs happening in that concert. And you said, no, don't want you there because of son. But then the son says, well, what if I wash your car? What if I vacuum? What if I cook your meals every week and, for a month? And he does all of this, right? And then after the month, he says, all right, now I deserve the tickets. And then you say no. How would the son react? There'd be a tantrum, right? I think many times that's how we bribe God. And I've seen people do this, and I didn't understand the dynamic because before they would say things like, I actually paid my tithe. I've been leader in so many things. All I was asking the church is that they would put blue carpet in, but they didn't. And because of that, I'm leaving this church. And, I didn't understand the mentality. It was almost like, that doesn't even make sense. But now I do. I worked so hard. You're supposed to give me what I want. I've actually slaved. That's the word that the eldest son was saying. You don't understand how many nights I stayed up doing all of this. I'm supposed to get what I want. And the board said no. And so now it's God's fault. Not only is God's fault, it definitely was the pastor's fault because they didn't get what they want. And I'm like, that's the elder son's thinking. And I don't know how many people walked away from church because they didn't get what they want, or even worse, they stayed in church because they got what they want. And now it's not about God. It's somehow because they got what they wanted. And somehow, who knows? Because when you look at the father, he was always looking out for his son to come home, his younger son. What do you think the father was doing so that the elder son would stop, I don't know, being a jerk? Maybe that's not a right word for it. But to have a relationship with his son that's better than transactional. What do you think the father was doing? Because do you think he too was wanting a relationship with his older son?
Did he even think about it?
Do you think he didn't think about his son? Is that what you're saying?
No, he probably didn't even give it a thought about his son being jealous, his older son.
Okay. Well, what if he knew that his son wasn't having a relationship? Is that a father would know?
Okay,
What if he knew that the son was just working so that he can get his house? You know, yeah, what would he try to do to try to, you know, get his son to change his mind or reach out to him?
I think that's an interesting part of the story to think about, that we're not told in the Bible what the relationship with the father and the son were, the oldest son and the father. It doesn't really clarify, so it could have been that the father knew and was kind of ignoring it, thinking his mind will change, he'll see, or whatever, or it could be he didn't know. He didn't know. I mean, there's a lot of kids, you can hide your emotions sometimes. If he thought he was just being faithful and
Well, if we look at the culture, right,
Mhm.
it's a patriarchal culture and it's inheritance. So you already know, we kind of understand a little bit in our Asian culture. Usually it's the older son or older child now, could be a daughter, responsible for parents when you get older. You know what I mean? And so you get the bulk. He already knew he's gonna inherit because he is the heir, he's the
Mhm.
oldest. So I think there is already an understanding. I'm dad and I'm gonna teach you what I know because you're gonna inherit this eventually. I think that's a given in this story, but I think what ended up happening is maybe the older son feels a little bit entitled because, well, this is mine, you know, I'm just waiting for you to pass on. But in the meantime, if he has already been trained from the beginning, you know what I mean? This is the land, this is how you do this, how you. So I think there is some relationship there, but maybe not in the sense, it's more of a responsibility relationship, not necessarily the emotional bonding
Right,
or spiritual bonding.
right. And being an elder son, the reason I'm being an elder son, not just here, but being an elder son in the parable, I believe the times that Jesus was trying to reach out to me was when he would say something, hey, can you just stop being a pastor for a second and just enjoy me? And I'm like, no, let me enjoy you. You know, I didn't even know what that was. I'm busy. Can't you tell? You know, can you just stop worrying about your sermon for a bit and let me actually use my words to speak to your heart? Because again, as an elder son, the Bible was not to get close to God. It was to show off my knowledge of the Bible. It was to beat people over the head with it. You know? And again, as the elder son, his focus was, how am I going to look good with this? Not, yeah, Dad, let's go for a walk. To him, is like a walk. What's that going to do? How's that going to, I mean, that's not even going to help me in my PR. You know, that's not going to help me look good. And I think the dad, many times, because I know that's what God was trying to do to me, is, hey, can you do something for me? Just for me. I relate so much to Peter, you know, I'm like, I'll carry the rock as long as it makes me look good, as long as I get something out of it. And God is basically saying, okay, can you just do it for me? Can you spend time with the Bible so you can get to know me?
And I think the older son probably had the responsibility from the beginning. And so he is focused on responsibility, right? And so, I mean, even in our personal walk, you kind of grow up thinking, okay, then you go look for the lost, you go look for this. And so our time has kind of been a list of things that we need to do, and we lose out on spending time with God, or just
Right.
getting to know him, because the most important thing is a personal relationship. Like, not a lot of people in the church even say that, it's, well, let's do this, let's give out Bible studies, let's hand out tracts, let's go to the nursing home, let's, what about just fellowship and sitting down and reading the Bible and just praying?
Right.
Well, I think even like you were saying, I think that in some ways, how much did the older son limit his relationship with his father? Because when he's complaining here, well, I did everything you wanted me to do. I served you, I obeyed you, but you never gave me a young goat to party with my friends. But yet the father says, son, you've always been with me, and everything I have is yours. How many times could the son have said, Dad, I want to have a party? And the father says, rock on, let's go, let's have a party. But I think in some ways that's kind of like us. Do we fully take advantage of our relationship with God, or was his relationship with his father so superficial that he didn't even think he could go to his dad and said, I'd like to have a part of your resources, let's have a party.
Right.
And I think just like us, sometimes we're like, we have this relationship with God, but is it enough to say, God, I need some of your resources?
Right.
Do I trust you enough to ask you for it? And I don't think the older son had that relationship with his father to even ask him.
Right. And he said it. The father said, I've always been here.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Where have you been?
Right, exactly.
I've always been waiting for you.
Yeah.
I've always asked you, can we go fishing together? Can we
Right.
take a walk? Can we talk? Can we have
Mhm.
lunch? And you're always busy.
Yeah.
And that I think is the sin of the elder son. That somehow it's a lack of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So after everything we talked about, what change in your life do you think what change what in the story would want you to make changes in your life, and what kind of changes would it be?
I think that Jesus always said that I and the Father are one. And in John 17, he talks about us being united with the Father and the Son. And we just talked a little bit about the other night about, what does it look like to be like him? And I think being able to see somebody who's dirty, somebody who's filthy, not necessarily physically, but their lifestyle or whatever, to be able to just wrap your arms around them and to say, hey, you belong, you're part of a family. I think that's something that I know I need to develop within me, to be more like the Father.
Right.
To overlook those faults and overlook those things that may seem to be unacceptable about people.
Right.
And be accepting.
I think I want to look at my actions more, like, why am I doing the things that I do? What is the reason that I'm doing it? Am I doing it for selfish pride, or am I doing it because I really want to share Jesus and want to share his love and care about those people?
I think transformation will only happen when we spend time with God.
Mhm.
I know for me, that's the biggest thing. I don't want to go to heaven and God saying, I've always been there.
Mhm.
I was always just waiting for you. And so every day I'm like, Lord, I'm here, whatever it is I'm doing, I know you're right by me. I'm going to be talking. There's always this talking to each other, not just about the good things, like, hey, this is great weather, but, Lord, they're fighting again, or what am I going to do with our politicians? Or, what do you think about the Warriors? I don't ever talk to God about the Bears, but it's again it's this thing like, Lord, I want to be walking with you every day. I want my thoughts And so if you're gonna bring up somebody that you want me, if you're gonna bring up a younger brother of mine that I can't notice as a younger brother because I'm too busy, being too busy being a pastor, then, I don't know, whack me over the head, do something, because I want to be next to you in everything that I do. And that, I believe, is something that brings a smile to his face. And I believe that anytime God smiles for whatever we're doing, it's a good day. All right, done.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Roundabout. We realize that you may have some questions or some comments on the topic that we discussed today. And if you do, please feel free to fill out the form below, and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. If you want a Bible or some materials that talk about this topic that we just discussed, please fill out the form below, and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again on the Roundabout.